Colleagues, I think we'll convene the meeting right now. I see everyone seated at the table. And colleagues, as we all know, yesterday was a tough day. Hopefully today will be a little better, and I'll leave it at that. Mr. Bryson, welcome to you and your officials. Minister, you've been at our committee many times in the past, so you know the drill. We'll look to you for a short opening address. Following that, we will have a series of questions from our colleagues around the table. And my understanding is, Minister, you'll be here for the first hour, and then your officials will stay here for the remaining second hour. Is that correct? Okay.
That's right.
Thank you for that. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to start off first expressing my condolences and sadness at the loss of our colleague Gord Brown yesterday, and to all parliamentarians, because we are part of a broader parliamentary family, and but particularly to our Conservative colleagues. I knew Gord well, and Claudine, and this is a great loss, and he was a very good person. And so, Mr. Chair, I'm pleased to be here with you today. I'm thankful for the invitation to talk about the 2018-2019 main estimates. I have with me Tyche Sarantakis, the Associate Secretary of the Treasury Board, and I'm going to say Brian for the last, Marcia Santiago, the Executive Director, and Renee LaFontaine, the Chief Financial Officer, and Brian Pagan, who's back with us now. Brian broke his leg a few weeks ago playing hockey, actually, but he's back with us now, and we're glad to have you back on the ice, as it were, Brian. So, on April 16th, Mr. Chair, I tabled the 2018-2019 main estimates, and these provide information to support the government's request that Parliament approves $276 billion of spending to deliver programs and services in the fiscal year starting April 1st, 2018. Avec ce budget principal des dépenses.
Through these main estimates, the government continues to make important investments in Canadians' priorities: growth, progress, reconciliation, and advancement, all as part of our plan to grow and strengthen Canada's middle class. We're also living up to our commitments in a way that is open, transparent, and accountable to Parliament.
In recent history, the main estimates include 100% of the measures announced in the budget for this year. This is a major step forward, and it's been made possible in part by changing the tabling date of the main estimates to mid-April, after the budget. As a result, parliamentarians now have a document that is relevant and complete so that they can better hold government to account on how it spends taxpayer dollars. To do this, we have added a new centrally managed budget implementation vote, TB Vote 40, to the main estimates. Parliamentarians can now trace each and every allocation from this new central vote to a specific line in the budget, Table A211, and the main estimates, Annex 1. This is a level of transparency not available in the previous estimates that parliamentarians have been debating and voting on for years. We have heard the argument that the legal constraints placed on the use of funds in the budget implementation vote are not sufficiently binding, and that the government could use this vote to fund whatever it wants. That is categorically false. Let me give you an example of how the budget implementation vote works. Budget 2018 proposes a number of important investments, including $154 million to the Department of Health to address the opioid crisis. These funds are reflected in the 2018-2019 main estimates budget implementation vote. But let's just say that over the course of the year, the opioid crisis worsened and the government decided it needed to spend more. If the government wanted to increase funding for this or for any other budget measure identified in the budget implementation vote, a separate funding decision would be required, and Parliament would be asked to provide additional approval. To repeat, using the budget implementation vote to exceed the allocations listed would be an unauthorized use of public funds. Mr. Chair, I've been very clear on this from the beginning. The main estimates document itself, tabled in Parliament, says that the budget implementation vote is, quote, for new measures approved and identified in Table A211 of the budget. This table is also included as an annex to the main estimates. As our Auditor General has said, the government is bound by those line-by-line allocations. To quote the Auditor General, you can't just decide somebody else should get more and somebody else can get less. To me, that's not the authority that the government has been given by Parliament. The Auditor General is right. And that's why I've said repeatedly on the record that the use of the budget implementation vote is legally binding to the allocations in that table, and that exceeding those allocations through this vote cannot happen without additional parliamentary approval. I spoke to the PBO earlier this week, and we discussed the idea of including allocations in the wording of the vote itself for even more clarity, and to provide him, but also to provide Parliament with even greater assurance. And based on that conversation, I'm confident that that this would provide the greater certainty that he's looking for. So in order to provide as much clarity as possible, we will be listing the allocations within the appropriation bill itself when it's tabled this spring. Now, another element of the PBO's report was the assertion that the budget implementation vote does not allow sufficient oversight by parliamentarians. In fact, parliamentarians not only still have the opportunity to study and vote on the budget and the estimates and the appropriation bills for the main and supplementary estimates, but for the first time, they also have at their disposal a detailed disclosure of the measures to be funded from the central vote in both the budget plan and the main estimates. Autrement dit, pour la toute première.
In other words, for the first time ever, when members are voting on the main estimates, they will know, initiative by initiative, where this budget money is going. This is a huge step forward for parliamentary oversight.
Also be able to see allocations to departments and remaining balances for the line-by-line budget measures in monthly reports online and in the next available estimates. And thanks to these important changes, parliamentarians now have more control over government spending than ever before. Mr. Chair, as you know, in our system of government, the ability of parliamentarians to hold the government to account is of utmost importance. To that end, we have made a number of important improvements. In addition to changing the timing of the main estimates to mid-April so that the budget items can be included, we have also increased transparency by reporting on frozen allotments. Beginning in the 2015-2016 Supplementary Estimate C, we now publish an online annex that provides Parliament an early indication of the lapses expected for the fiscal year. This was an improvement that the PBO stated, quote, represents an important increase in fiscal transparency, ensuring that parliamentarians are on less unequal footing with the government. Beginning in the 2016-2017 Supplementary Estimates A, we also now provide parliamentarians with a reconciliation of the accrual expense forecast in the budget with the cash expenditure forecast through the estimates process. Again, this development has been cited by the PBO as a positive step forward in transparency and efforts to align the budget and estimates process. Moreover, we have reformed annual departmental reports so parliamentarians can get better information on planned spending, expected outcomes, and actual results. On that note, Mr. Chair, I would encourage the committee to finalize its review on of the pilot project on purpose-based votes to address the difficulty parliamentarians have in connecting the money we vote for with the program it's actually used for. I firmly believe that strengthening the link between votes and the purpose or desired results of a program will further strengthen parliamentary oversight of government spending. Mr. Chair, I appreciate the opportunity and the invitation to join your committee today. Through the changes I've discussed this morning, we are improving the clarity, the transparency, and the accountability of government spending. In so doing, we are empowering parliamentarians to hold the government to account for how it spends tax dollars. Looking forward to the questions, Mr. Chair, and
Thank you very much, Minister.
and the discussion.
And we'll start with the questions now. 7 minutes from Madame Ratanzi, please.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for being here. And thank you for the clarification of how you're increasing the accountability and transparency in the process. By analyzing or by aligning the estimates and the budget, and by bringing in the budget implementation vote, which you say binds the amounts listed in the table that shows the allocation for each budget initiative. But there is still some consideration about what is, whether this is certain or not, and whether there is a slush fund that's available to you to use. And my question is, I know that in the previous government there was an Accountability Act, and there is this confusion because the Accountability Act did not function properly. I used to be the chair of the government operations, and I know some of the things that we had to discuss. So could you tell us how your process will give certainty to parliamentarians that they can look at additional spending and be guaranteed that you will give them that opportunity, number one? And number two, how is this process different? How much does it allow, or what the government has done to give parliamentarians access to better and more timely information? Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin, and appreciate your question. I mean, the Auditor General has said that he is satisfied with that our new budget implementation vote is legally bound to the items and amounts listed in the budget table, A211. That is our government's intent, and it is also our legal interpretation. I'm proud that we are adding this amount of transparency and accountability, and that it empowers Parliament much more than the previous budget estimates process. And I want to ensure that there can be no doubt as to our government's intent for even the most skeptical amongst us. And not that you're skeptical, but you are a chartered accountant, I believe.
Yes, I am.
But that's why we're taking a further step to actually take that which is all the items listed in A211 and putting them in the supply bill. And for those people who can't connect the annex to the main estimates which clearly indicate that, I'm just taking a further step to make that clear. But part of a broader results-based approach our government is taking, the Treasury Board is very engaged in that reporting not just programs but results. In some cases, even challenges we're having on specific programs, so that the public is aware of what we are investing in, and that we're not just looking at outputs in terms of spending, but actually measuring outcomes. And as I said earlier, one of the things I want to do more is purpose-based votes, whereby parliamentarians have even more input and ultimately authority. Again, on this, just simply sequencing the main estimates after the budget makes this discussion this morning a far more pertinent one than the ones we used to have, where the main estimates would come out and a few weeks later the budget would come out, and basically all the discussion we had on the main estimates up to that point would be rendered out of date and to a certain extent less relevant. It's something that the Globe and Mail in 2016 said the current sequence is bad to the point of absurdity, with spending estimates usually coming out before the budget and in a different accounting format, rendering them virtually meaningless. It's a discredited practice that has only served to keep MPs in the dark about how tax dollars are being spent. This is something we take very seriously. As some of you may be aware, I'm coming up on 21 years as a member of Parliament. Most of those have been spent in opposition and at committee. And it is one of the reasons why I personally feel very vested in our work to make government, not just our government, but future governments, more accountable to Parliament. It is absolutely fundamental to what we do. And we've made significant progress, and we'll continue to work to make more progress.
I'm very familiar with the estimates and the budgets being really, when they were misaligned, they didn't make any sense to anybody. So how has the progress been made from the previous, how have we made the system so much more open that parliamentarians can see the figures? How is it different? This approach is different from the previous approaches.
Minister, you'll have about a minute to make hopefully a comprehensive answer in 60 seconds.
Again, the sequencing certainly makes the exercise more relevant, but actually having the list line by line that binds the government, we can't exceed those amounts without coming back to Parliament. If you look at the level of detail provided within table A211, it is very significant in terms of the granularity of it. But for the first time in recent history, the main estimates will actually include 100% of the measures announced in the budget for the fiscal year. Now beyond that, it is creating within government, not just between Department of Finance and Treasury Board, but with departments, a different working relationship in terms of the budget estimates process that I believe is not only more transparent, but also more effective in terms of how we are conducting our business.
Much. Monsieur Deltel, 7 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you very much, Chair. Welcome, Mr. Minister, colleagues, staff.
Gordon Brown, and especially with Claudine and the two children. Monsieur le Président, on est donc rassemblés pour parler du budget.
So we're in attendance here to discuss the main estimates today, and this is the first responsibility, of course, of the President of the Treasury Board. We analyze each of the expenditures, each element, each vote, and before we pass it and vote it in the House. Now, the main estimates, as tabled by the President of the Treasury Board, is quite unique. We see $7 billion, which is quite identified specifically. This is your notable vote 40. It was perhaps a very sticky and stiff analysis done by the PBO, and I will quote that was asking the Treasury Board of Supplement to have this money before we've had a look at that, which goes against the principles that would guide us as parliamentarians. Each expense should be authorized by a vote in Parliament, which is not the case. So allow me to say, Mr. Chair, what we've described as vote 40, and I will read exactly what we find in the vote. Authority granted to the Treasury Board to supplement in support of initiatives announced in the budget of February 27, 2018, any appropriation of the fiscal year, including to allow for the provision of new grants or for increase in the amount of the grant that is listed in any of the estimates for the fiscal year, as long as the expenditures made possible are not otherwise provided for and are within the legal mandates of the department and other organizations for which they were made. All this to say, Mr. Chair, that this is just a lot of noise. Rather than having a string of words with no end, and they could have said, we'll do what we want with this money. That's the truth. That's the reality. You're looking for a blank check, $7 billion. No detail as to what it's going to be used for. Of course, there could be some contingencies that arise. This is why, originally, the government always has a contingency fund, just in case. There's hundreds. There's 700 million in it. But 7 billion, sir? Mr. President, the president of the Treasury Board, who is supposed to be the most transparent Treasury Board of all Canadian history, why are you seeking from our parliamentarians to write them a blank check that he can spend the year any way he wishes, particularly the year before an election year? With all due respect, Mr. Dutel, that is completely incorrect. We divulge and share all the details that will begin to be announced from the main estimates. As in the main estimates, each vote will be identified. There are monthly updates, which are aligned for all of the approved measures approved by Treasury Board, for which votes, operational expenditures have been, in fact, set aside for budget implementation.
Is false. The fact is that every line-by-line item you see on table A211, and this is referred to in the estimate in the annex, binds the government to not exceed those. We would have to, even for a case of an emergency situation, and like as I cited the opioid crisis, if it worsened and we needed to increase, we would have to come back to Parliament. Now, you're an experienced parliamentarian, Mr. Deltel, and if I may say, quite an effective one. And you've been in the provincial legislature, the National Assembly. And you would be familiar with these processes. And I understand, you know, you're playing politics, and that's fine. But you're entitled to your opinions, but you're not entitled to your parallel facts. The fact is that line by line, every item in here, in budget, on page or table A211, binds the government to not exceed those amounts without going to Parliament. And the Auditor General has also agreed with that. And in fact, we will actually, to make it more clear, we will actually take those items and we will put those line-by-line items in the supply bill, so that you don't have to cross-reference, because obviously that is taking up too much work for you. So I'm trying to help.
Oui, mais justement, si on veut aider,
But if you want to help, you have to perhaps hear what I had just said. I'm not the only person who thinks this way. The PBO said the same thing. And I'll quote, practically none of the amounts in the new credit have been examined by the normal process of as tabled before Treasury Board, so that government's sums allocated will be optimized on the go. The PBO is saying that you're not following the current practice. You have $7 billion anywhere in any department, depending on the goodwill of Treasury Board. Well, I'm very sorry, Mr. President of the Treasury Board. It's not Treasury Board that decides on how the money is going to be sent. It's Parliament. Mr. Chairman, it's quite interesting to see that the Conservatives are all of a sudden interested into the PBO's functions and duties. These are the same Conservatives who had to be brought before the courts so that the PBO, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, could in fact obtain needed information. The same Conservatives that put the former PBO through the
Interest
ridge.
that the Conservatives have in the parliamentary budget officers.
Do you agree
is
with the
something-
actual
I've always
parliamentary-
demonstrated great respect for the work of the Parliamentary Budget Office.
So do
We
you
work
respect what
closely
he's
with
saying
them,
now?
But
Do you respect what he's saying about your job?
The Conservatives had to be taken to court to provide.
As I
Let's be
am
very
totally
clear.
engaged in
Do not
this,
answer,
we
Minister.
are out of time. I'm sure that we'll have this conversation continuing as we go around the table, but we have to move on to Mr. Blakey for 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My question for you, you talk about putting the table items from A211 into the Appropriations Act. Will you include the amounts as well that are in the table? Because for as much as you say that you're bound to spend only on what's in the table, it's not clear to me where the authority comes from for that. So if it's not in the wording of the bill, where is the legal constraint? And if it's in the wording of even what's in the main estimates, where it says the vote is for new measures approved and identified in Table A211 of Budget 2018, that doesn't commit the government to the numbers in the table.
Again, the annex item, or the annex in the main estimates, refer to the table, and the table provides granularly the amounts. And we will go further and take the items as listed line by line and put them
With the amounts?
in the supply.
With the
bill.
amounts.
Well, Brian, they will have the amounts.
That's a
There's no
yes or
reason
no.
we wouldn't.
Yeah.
They will have the amounts. I wouldn't put them in without the amounts, Mr. Blakey. But we will do that, and you will appreciate.
Now, are you going to
weren't
take,
here
are you
in the
going to take the
previous
items
Parliament, but-
from the budget table, or are you going to take it from the annex and the main estimates? Because there are actually some discrepancies between the annex and the main estimates that's supposed to mirror what's in the budget and
the
the budget
annex-
table itself. So for instance, under the Department of Industry, there are 2 programs that appear in the main estimates table that don't appear under that same department in the budget table. The regional, there's a suggested allocation for regional
annex.
development agencies, and there's a suggested allocation for a new women entrepreneurship strategy under that department that wasn't reflected in the budget. So which is it? Are you going to use the numbers from the appendix in the main estimates? Or are you
The
gonna
annex,
use the numbers from the budget?
The annex items are more detailed, and we would provide that level of detail.
Right. So why do we continue to talk about the table in the budget
Well,
when we're actually talking about the
you ask a
information
very-
that's in the main
You're
estimates?
asking a very good question,
And
Mr.
they're,
Blakey.
and they're not exactly the same.
The reality is that the information on, that we've laid out both in the main estimates and in which is more detailed, and the line-by-line items in Table A211 in the budget, should clear up any questions.
Now, in
And-
terms of
but
the wording
in terms
that-
of putting in the supply bill.
In terms of the wording for
I'm
the
fine
supply
with that.
bill, is that something we're going to get when this comes to committee of the whole, or are you committed to working with opposition parties in advance of that to ensure that we find the wording satisfactory as well?
Well, if we put the level of detail from the annex in the supply bill, I can't imagine there being dissatisfaction
Well,
with that level.
well, it's going to be in the wording. I
granularity.
mean, you didn't imagine there'd be dissatisfaction with the original wording of the
I
appropriation
still
bill,
find it
and there
hard
was.
to believe, to be honest.
So what I'm wanting to know is, are you going to be speaking to us prior to tabling the bill so that we can let you know whether or not we find the wording satisfactory before Parliament is put on the spot?
We will take that under advisement.
So it's neither yes or a no.
Well,
eh?
I keep
What
saying
what I'd
yes.
like to know, what I'd like to know, because you're the principal spokesperson for Treasury Board, obviously, is whether you think that the costing process at Treasury Board provides a level of rigor and detail that the budget costing process does not.
I believe that the working relationship between finance and Treasury Board.
Do you
and the
think that
Treasury Board
process
no,
adds rigor and detail to a significant degree
I
over
believe-
what's presented in the
I
budget?
believe that the budgeting process and the Treasury Board submission process work together very well in the Treasury
Well,
Board.
but they don't.
but
Actually, the
Treasury
reason
Board-
for the central
actually-
vote is that those two processes don't work well
actually, I
together.
think
And
that-
we've heard clearly from the parliamentary budget officer that if Treasury Board and the Department of Finance worked better together, we wouldn't need a catch-all central vote for all the new budget
The last time I checked,
items.
PBO doesn't work at Treasury Board.
Well, no,
the
but you don't
reality-
have
the
to work
reality
at
is-
Treasury Board to see that there's a lack of cooperation,
No, no.
because if you had that cooperation, then you wouldn't need to have a
Actually-
catch-all central vote.
Actually, I can tell you there's a very strong level of cooperation between Treasury Board and Finance.
Well, clearly not
And
what's
in
required
fact,
in
if
order
you-
to have budget
if you
items
look at
in the main
level-
estimates.
If you look
As they do in
at-
Australia, which is your preferred example.
Which is actually, and look, this is the first time in a long time that we've actually done this type of alignment between the main estimates and the budget in terms of the sequence. And in the first year, we've had really significant success, and you would acknowledge that this is a significant
So-
step forward. You've told me that.
My
And-
question
but beyond,
to you.
But beyond that, in the first year, we've achieved this success. As time goes on, this is going to bake in an even stronger working relationship between Treasury Board, Finance, and departments.
My question
as
to
we
you
move
is
forward
that
in terms
if-
of strengthening
if
the
folk-
budget,
if folks aren't
budget
just-
and Treasury Board process.
If people aren't just wasting their time at Treasury Board, if the costing process actually adds value, and the PBO has suggested that it does, because when they tracked the budget items from 2016, they said somewhere in the neighborhood of 31% of the items, either there was significantly more spent or less spent than what was foreseen in budget spending. The question is, if there's valuable work being done at Treasury Board, why should parliamentarians not benefit from that work prior to approving funding, which is the norm and has been the norm? But what the central vote does is actually authorizes a lot of money, almost $7 billion worth of money, because only $221 million of this vote is actually allocated so far. Those are the only things that have been through Treasury Board. So why should parliamentarians not benefit from the more rigorous costing prior to approving authority for program spending?
Well, first of all, we cannot exceed any of these amounts without going
But
back
we can't ask
to
questions
Parliament.
about programs that haven't been costed adequately. So if Treasury Board plays a real role in providing decent costing,
I would disagree with what you're saying, because Treasury Board and Finance work together even in the budgeting process. They work with
well then
departments
why weren't
and-
these
and
why
this has
didn't these
been-
items
so there
if,
has-
if
there
that
has been
relationship
rigor.
exists, why did these items not go through the Treasury Board approval process prior to the main estimates and then get included in the regular departmental estimates?
Daniel, you cited the Australian model. Now, the Australian model, where main estimates and the budget come out simultaneously, and that work, that is a gold standard. And that is something that I've said to you, I've said at this committee, is something that we will attain.
But what
over
you're
time.
asking
But
now
what
is
we've
that in
done-
the
what we've done
interim,
here-
Parliament
Gentlemen, I'm
sacrifices the power
sorry.
of oversight.
What we've
Gentlemen,
done here,
we
and I
want to
think
give
you-
adequate time for everyone here to hear questions and answers. And having said that, I'd like to move on now to Mr. Peterson for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Treasury Board officials and to the President of the Treasury Board for being with us this morning. I think this process needs to be looked at as a nonpartisan process. I think the number one role as a parliamentarian is to oversee government spending, regardless of what party you're in. Mr. President, I'm sure you would agree, based on your 21 years of experience, as you said, most of it in opposition, that a fundamental role of a parliamentarian, and indeed the fundamental role of our parliamentary system, is oversight of expenditures by the government. I don't think any member sitting around this table would disagree with that premise. At least I would hope not. So that begs a few questions, of course, as a member of parliament. In order to provide effective oversight and efficient oversight, for that matter, I think we need access to as much information as possible in a timely manner. And in that sense, I do think that the new sequencing is a vast improvement over the old way of doing things, so to speak. Now, you mentioned, Mr. Treasury Board President, that the new system will bake into it a stronger working relationship with finance. Can you elaborate a bit on that? And to me, I'm saying, okay, that may be true, and then in that sense, this is sort of a first step. And how do you see this process evolving to get to the outcome that we all want, regardless of what party we're from, is that Parliament needs information in a timely manner to review expenditures of government, to make a decision whether or not to approve those expenditures. Our role is as basic and fundamental as that, and I just wonder how you think the sequencing may be a step in the right direction, and if only a step, what else do we need to do to get to that outcome?
Thank you very much for the question. First, getting the sequencing right in and of itself makes a significant difference. The discussions we used to have on main estimates in the weeks just before a budget were largely a waste of Parliament's efforts and time, rendered basically irrelevant by the budget a few weeks later. We are now in the position where we can have a more productive discussion on main estimates that contain the budget initiatives. Over time, and I can tell you, and I've been Treasury Board President now for over 2 years, the working relationship between Treasury Board and Finance is very strong, as it is with individual departments. The budget submissions and Treasury Board submission process is aligned to an extent that it has not been in the past. I understand there are people at the Parliamentary Budget Office who may have worked for Treasury Board in the past, and they might be surprised at the workings of Treasury Board and Finance and the productive and effective work that is going on today. As I said earlier, we have great respect for the work of the Parliamentary Budget Officer. And in fact, when I spoke to Jean-Denis earlier this week, he was satisfied with the step of actually putting the items from Table A211 in the supply bill. And I didn't see that as it makes it even more plain to the PBO and more plain to Parliament that we are serious about our accountability. And furthermore, as the Auditor General said, I read yesterday, he agreed with the government's assessment that in fact our process as it is now is binding on the government. We cannot exceed any of those amounts without going back to Parliament. And that is a significant step forward. And we want to do more. I would hope that parliamentarians of all parties are familiarizing themselves with our new departmental reports and that are much more transparent than those which existed in the past, easy to understand, very results focused. Again, this is something that is important to our government. It's something that's important to me as a parliamentarian. And I would hope there are certain things on which we should be able to agree, and making the budget estimates process more transparent is one that is good for all parliamentarians, regardless of where you are in the House of Commons. It's a responsibility not just opposition members have, but government members have, or members of the governing party, to hold government accountable. And I'm actually very pleased with this progress that we made in a fairly short period of time. People like Brian and his team have been working on it for a longer period of time, but this is something that I believe is a significant advancement. All right, now Brian, you may want to add something to that, or Tyke.
Well, sure, Minister, sure, if I may. Thank you very much, Mr. Peterson, for the question. And just again to build. Okay, the main estimates represent the government's expenditure plan. By tabling the main estimates after the budget, we are presenting the full plan for Parliament so that, in fact, they have enhanced oversight in terms of how the government will manage its priorities as articulated in Budget 2018, which has been endorsed by Parliament, and as laid out in detail in the estimates through Annex A1. In that way, we are aligned with the budget, and at this time, we are presenting the full plan before Parliament. And that, in our understanding, has been the objective of the work that the President cited over the last number of years.
Much. We'll now go to our 5-minute rounds of questions. Mr. Kelly, you're up for 5.
Thank you. Minister, you made a significant commitment this morning during your opening remarks, one that we hadn't heard previously, and that you will include in the wording of the actual bill, include the entire table A211 and all of the specifics in that table in the wording of the budget. Why this morning?
Well, let me try to explain this in a way that
Is it in response to critics that describe this in absence of that inclusion, that this vote 40 would have in fact been a slush fund?
the characterization that you've made is bunk. It is absolutely false.
Without the wording in the bill.
The reality is that Table A211, which is referred to in the main estimates, is binding on the government. Now, I have 4-year-olds, 2 of them, Rose and Claire, twin daughters, and sometimes they ask me for things that are kind of irrational, right? And they get irrational sometimes. But as a parent, sometimes you just give it to them, and it quiets them down, and you can go back to your work. And it makes a much more productive family, and you can actually get back to the main business.
I'm not sure I understand where this is going. Are you comparing the PBO to 4 irrational children?
My
Four-year-olds?
daughters are whip smart, and
We're talking about the PBO.
and they're easy to get along with. The reality is, but I would never attack the PBO. In fact, I've always spoken of the importance of the work of the PBO. Furthermore, unlike the past government, the PBO actually had to take the Conservative government to court to get information.
So
Beyond
the PBO,
that, the Conservatives actually called the PBO unreliable and not credible. And in fact, the Conservative government was the only government in the history of the British Commonwealth to be found in contempt of Parliament for not giving Parliament information.
Why didn't you include the information in A211 in Vote 40 itself in the first place? You're now assuring us that when it's tabled, that you will in fact do that.
Because obviously
You could have done that
you were
from the
having
beginning.
difficulties cross-referencing the main estimates to the budget in Table A211. So I'm just making it easier for you.
You're actually now would in fact make it legally binding where it would not have been before. As
It was,
both
the Auditor General, in whom I have a great deal of
The PBO,
faith,
the Library of
considered
Parliament,
it legally
perhaps
binding
clerks of the
as
House
it-
would have all
as it
disagreed
was.
with
So
you.
the Auditor General, in whom I place a great deal of trust, was very comfortable with this.
If any expenditures, whether with the inclusion or not, were made outside of the bounds prescribed in A211, would you or any other future president of the Treasury Board be in contempt of Parliament if they were not spent in accordance with that table?
If they went above, and I used the example of the opioid crisis and the funding for that, if we needed to spend more on that crisis, we would have to come back to Parliament.
What if you wanted to spend less? What if you chose to spend less and chose to spend it on a different?
These are for the maximums. You're approving up to that amount. So now, as a Conservative, you should be happy if we spend less. But of course that wasn't consistent with your government because you guys always spend more. Now, in terms of if we wanted to exceed, these are limits.
Demanded
We
by
cannot
you.
exceed these limits because you are approving up to that amount. You're approving up to. That's the way.
So you haven't answered my question, Minister. If you are saying that if you wanted to spend more on that particular piece, I am suggesting if you did wish to spend yet less, but to spend instead on something under the budget, which has a number of very vague categories, would that minister then be in contempt if they did so?
Trying to understand.
We've only got about 5 seconds left, so perhaps you can get to your answer in the next intervention.
I just want to understand the question here. Are you suggesting that if we spent less, that somehow that would be somehow contemptuous of Parliament?
You then wanted to repurpose the money, which in the absence of wording in the bill, you would have had the authority to do that.
To
That
move
was
it
the
from-
criticism
we-
that
we-
was
we
levied
cannot-
on
we
you.
cannot we cannot move from one category to another. So, there-
We'll have to
but
break it
these-
off
but
there.
let's be very clear. These are, as they're
Madame
stated,
Mendes,
8
5
to
minutes,
11 is
please.
the maximum.
I'll give you the chance to finish that, Mr. President, to clarify, because that has been my understanding, that if you have a line item in the budget or in the supply bill, you know, you're going to spend that money or less, but you can't cross over, you can't pollinate all
Yeah,
over the place.
exactly.
But please clarify it, please.
Well, I think you've done a great job of that, Alexandra. And I thought it was pretty evident as well. But what is just in terms of big picture, these reforms make this reportage the most transparent in recent history. You are voting as parliamentarians on real numbers. You are getting real details, and you're being given the numbers in advance. And in fact, on a monthly basis, you can track this. This will be provided and updated on a monthly basis. I want to, over time, and I would like to engage even on the new departmental reporting, and because that is actually equally important in terms of the activities and the results of individual departments and programs. And as I said earlier, I'd like this committee to engage on the whole issue of purpose-based reporting and budgeting. But this is, again, to be absolutely clear, we are bound, as the Auditor General has said, and I read his comments yesterday, by Table A211 of the budget, which is clearly referred to in the main estimates. And again, if you go to Table A211, it's quite granular, and much more so in 2009, I believe, and Tyche, there was in 2009, what was there was
a budget implementation vote of $3 billion. The biggest single difference is that the budget 2009 vote 35 didn't have any particular line items associated with it, in contrast to this vote 40.
So that would have been characterizable as a slush fund. This can't be.
Would you mind, Mr. President, just to comment on this paragraph from the PBO's report that I find a bit outlandish, but I'd like your comments on it. Compared to the old approval system, TBS due diligence will no longer be performed on new budget spending measures before the government asks for Parliament's assent. I don't understand how this can fit with what you've just explained to us. So,
well, I think there was some level of confusion there. I think that we have sufficiently cleared that up. Brian may want to add something to that. Again, I have great respect for the work of the PBO, and we have a working relationship with the PBO and with the Auditor General. The Auditor General, which is a significant authority on these matters, agrees with us. And my discussion with Jean-Denis earlier this week, he expressed comfort with our approach and making this very plain by actually taking the items in A211 and putting them line by line in the supply bill is a step that is
reassuring.
In our, it demonstrates that we are serious, and throughout this process, we are and we will be serious when it comes to our accountability to Parliament for the expenditure of tax dollars. Brian?
Well, thank you. As the PBO notes, this is not the only central vote that TB administers. There are 5 other votes that total $5.2 billion. There is no detail on those votes in terms of department, initiative, or amount. And vote 40 compares very favorably, obviously, in that context, as it does internationally. We have looked at similar votes in other jurisdictions, including Australia and the provinces. And this is the one vote administered by the central agency that clearly identifies by department, by initiative, and by dollar amount where the money is going.
Thank you very much. Mr. Poilievre, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. President, Mr. Askari of the Parliamentary Budget Officer's Office said, described the main estimates bill that it would approve funds in support of initiatives announced in the budget, that wording was, quote, very broad and general wording, and, quote, does not compel them to spend as described. Gives the government, presumably, it gives flexibility to government, presumably, to allocate the funds differently than they had indicated in the budget. To us and to parliamentarians, that reduces the kind of control and scrutiny they could have over these measures. That was right from the Parliamentary Budget Officer's personnel. Now, as a result of this backlash, you're backing down. And I want to, on behalf of the opposition, I give you credit for that. The government was caught, I think, with its hand in the cookie jar, no, but in fairness, the president has listened to the backlash, and he has responded today by starting his retreat. That being said, we cannot, as an opposition, announce support for the decision because we have not had chance yet to review the exact change that the president has just put on the floor. We will consult with the PBO to ascertain whether he is satisfied now that the president of the Treasury Board has begun this climb down. So we'll put that aside for a moment, and I'll just ask about the role of parliamentary committees in reviewing the items contained in the central vote. So, for example, in Table A211, there's funds for the Atlantic Canada Opportunity Agency. That typically would go to the Industry Committee. Will you be the one to testify at the Industry Committee when it reviews and approves the estimates for that sum of money?
The estimate process, the budget process, and the committee process has been in place for a long time. I appear, I don't know how many times I've appeared.
But will you be the one to appear on that particular item, for example?
On that item, in fact, any of these items, Treasury Board is accountable. So we are, as a government, accountable to not exceed those amounts. Now, if at Industry Committee there is a desire to hear from, for instance, my colleague Minister Navdeep Bains, before Industry to talk about that, I'm certain Minister Bains, who is accountable for these expenditures within his department, and I said would be more than happy to appear before Industry Committee.
And then that item, which is going to fund his department, would be voted on at the Industry Committee?
The reality is that the committee process, in terms of the approval of these expenditures, the Finance Committee, of course, plays an important role in terms of parliamentary approval. But every parliamentarian has an opportunity to vote on
in the committee of the whole
through the supply bill.
Right, in the committee of the whole. But I'm asking about the specific committees, because in the past, when a CRA measure has come forward, that measure has been voted on at the Finance Committee because CRA reports to Finance. Will the items in here be voted on separately by their respective committees, or will they all be voted on by this single committee?
They'll be voted on at this committee.
So, Mr. President, thank you for answering my question. I appreciate you have answered the question, and I want to thank you for that. So that brings me to my next question. That brings me,
Just for one, and I won't take any time from from you, Mr. Polyev. But just to be clear, Mr. Minister, just to be clear here, from a procedural standpoint, it would be correct to allow the questioner to complete a question. I know that you have some other opportunities, and you will have in your next intervention.
Yes, I
We've
will.
only got a minute left, so I'll go to Mr. Polyev for the last, possibly the last question.
So
We've got about 35 seconds, Mr.
instead
Polyev.
of the old process that was in place before, members of the Finance Committee would examine Canada Revenue Agency allocations. Members of the Infrastructure and Transport Committee would review the Canadian Air Transport Security Authority. Members of the Heritage Committee would review Canadian heritage allocations. That meant that parliamentarians were able to dig down into those numbers. But instead, you're going to take, from what you, based on the answer you've just given, maybe you'll give a different one, which you've shown you can do today so far. The reality is that a big $7 billion ask will come to a single committee with roughly a dozen members, and they will be required to provide scrutiny in a short period of time and vote upon the approval for those funds.
Thank you, Mr. Polyev. I'm afraid we're out of time. Now, Mr. Bryson, I'm sure you will have an answer for that, but we're going to go to Monsieur Ayoub, and I'm quite certain he will ask you to expand upon the answer that you were going to give to Mr. Polyev. 5 minutes, please, Mr. Ayoub.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bryson.
Sir, the question, and to realign all the information that you can give to the opposition, because they need the information.
Certainly, and John Diefenbaker, former Progressive Conservative Prime Minister, said the loudest noises sometimes come from the emptiest drums. But Mr. Polyev purposefully used up all the time because he did not want an answer, because the answer would discredit just about everything he said. The fact is that our legal interpretation, and with the accordance of the Auditor General, is that we are bound to the line-by-line items listed in A211. And that is the legal opinion. We may differ from time to time with the PBO, and I completely differ with them on this one, again, with respect for their work. But I could read line by line the supply bill to Mr. Polyev at night before he goes to bed, and it wouldn't be enough. He would still claim that was not me too much. It's always my little girls always say, one more book. And again, this committee is an important committee. For vote 40, there's an accountability for Treasury Board on this. I have demonstrated time and time again my openness to meeting with this committee, but there's also Mr. Polyev could work with their industry critic, as an example, and on items like this, actually work with other I think they call them shadow ministers, or shadowy something, and they could actually work together and find out what the questions or what the issues would be, and the ability, in the same way a cabinet or a shadowy cabinet can work together across portfolios to ensure that Mr. Polyev and others have the right questions. And that's how cabinet works, and I don't know how their cabinet worked. And again, I find it a little rich that the Conservative Party, in government, were the only government in the history, not just of Canada, but in the British Commonwealth, to have been found in contempt of Parliament for not providing Parliament with information, would be on a moral high horse on this issue. I find it gobsmacking. Now, I get a secret. I like Pierre. There's something I find him, and I can tell you, he was my critic when I was Public Works Minister a long time ago. And he's actually, don't tell him, but he's actually a pretty sharp parliamentarian. And he's very political. but sometimes he lets that get in the way of actually just recognizing that something is good. And one of the things that I like in parliamentarians is where they can hear a good idea from another party and say, you know what, that's a good idea. They're doing something with which I agree. And I think that that is something that Pierre will develop over time. But he's not there yet, quite clearly, because this is absolutely, unequivocally, undoubtedly the most significant step forward in terms of accountability and transparency that has happened in decades. And I will continue to move in this direction because I have a love of Parliament and a respect for Parliament and parliamentarians. And that explains my affection for Mr. Poilievre, who is actually a pretty good parliamentarian. But let's be very clear on this one. There is common ground, notwithstanding the banter and noise on some of this stuff. This is good for Parliament. This is good for accountability. And this committee that ought to be championing more accountability and transparency ought to be actually supportive of these changes, because it is better for Parliament and will mean that all parliamentarians, government and opposition, will have more ability to hold our government and future governments to account.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, I know you had guaranteed your appearance here for 1 hour. We're just a few minutes over that, but to complete our complete round, we have Mr. Blakey for 3 minutes. If you would agree to stay here, since I know you enjoyed the first exchange so much, for an additional 3 minutes, while Mr. Blakey has a couple of
I
questions.
just hope he gives me a chance to get a word in. Mr. Poilievre didn't. But anyway, Mr. Blakey. Mr. Blakey.
Sir, you mentioned in your remarks that you're hoping that this is a process where we can all work well together on, because there is obviously work to do in terms of improving the process. And I would say that we've been negotiating about the estimates in various ways and talking about them for the life of the entire Parliament. And I do think we made some good progress in terms of good faith work last June when we agreed to a delay in the tabling of the main estimates. But when we were talking about that, we were talking about doing that so that there would be more time between the budget and the main estimates for programs to receive Treasury Board approval and be included in the departmental estimates. At no time, up until a week before you tabled the main estimates this year, was there ever mention of a central vote. And then, beyond that, we've said, okay, well, this is actually quite different than what was conceived in the negotiations that we had. Today is a decent conversation, but there's only 10 non-government parliamentarians sitting around the table. I've asked for a take-note debate on that. That's a request that you have yet to grant. You've not moved for that debate, which would allow actually all parliamentarians to participate in this conversation. I've asked, you've suggested that you're going to take some measures to provide more legal clarity in terms of the authorities granted by parliamentarians under Vote 40 by including the schedule in the appropriation bill. When I asked if you would consult with the opposition parties to make sure that that wording is satisfactory, you said you'd take it under advisement. So we don't have a commitment. You're asking for us to move forward in this process in good faith, and yet when we've made requests for you to have the conversation with Parliament as a whole, when we've asked for you to confer with us before deciding on the language of the bill, the first time you did that, it didn't go well. We weren't satisfied with that wording. The parliamentary budget officer wasn't convinced that the wording was adequate. So now you're taking new measures, and we're asking you to be consultative so that you're not putting Parliament on the spot, and so that we can actually do as you ask, which is to work together in order to have a better process. I think there are still problems with doing all of this on a central vote. It raises the question as to why government wouldn't just have one central vote for all the voted authorities and have a comprehensive table in the budget. I mean, one of the disadvantages of that is that it's not broken down by department then. It all appears in one vote, and the Treasury Board Minister would be responsible for speaking to all of government initiatives that Parliament is voting authority for. We're in effect doing that for all the new initiatives within the budget. So there are problems with the idea of a central vote, even if the language of the appropriations bill is changed. I think it's incumbent upon the government to create the opportunity for a meaningful conversation about that in Parliament. It's why I've asked for a take-note debate. I'm mystified as to why a minister who likes to talk about how open to parliamentary dialogue he is, would refuse that request. So I'm going to ask you one more time, particularly in light of the new information you've announced at committee today, will you commit to having a take note debate in the House?
You've got about 5 seconds to say yes or no, Mr. Minister.
Break, for goodness sakes. Mr. Chair, let me finish. I just want to, I want to end this on a...
If you can do it fairly quickly, because we are over
I will,
time.
for sure.
I set it up as a yes/no question, so
absolutely.
you could be really
well, a couple
expedient.
Things. Daniel, you've got opposition day motions. You can talk to your House leader, and if they believe that's you use one of your opposition days.
You guys are the government. You decide the business any time of day.
I'm sorry. I am going to stop it now.
Mr. Blakey's letter to me, actually, I've got your letter where you requested this the take note debate. You say in it, we in the NDP supported this change in the sequencing, having estimates that reflect the priorities announced by the government in its budget. But on June 20th, 2017, you voted against. Now, I appreciate your letter saying you supported it, and I guess you gave us some moral support. But moral support's kind of like moral victories. I don't like moral victories. I like actually support if you want to, but I'm saying that on you say you supported it, but then you voted against it. So I would, whoever writes your letters in your office should check your voting record on some of those things.
Thank you very much, Minister. Colleagues, we will suspend for a couple of minutes before we reconvene with our departmental officials. Minister Bryson, thank you once again for appearing before us. We're suspended for about 2 minutes. Colleagues, I believe we'll reconvene now. My understanding is, Mr. Pagan, I'll ask this question of you. You do not have any opening statements. You're ready to go right into questions and answers. Thank you very much. Colleagues, I would like to keep about 10 to 15 minutes reserved at the end of this meeting to go in camera for committee business. I only have one item, and that's the consideration of the draft letter that we've got for the chair of the Ethics Commissioner. I just want some approval or direction on that. Which means we should have enough time for one complete round of 7-minute interventions and probably 2 other 5-minute interventions before we suspend and go in camera. My understanding is Madame Mendez, you're up first, and you have 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And well, actually, I would like just to go back to the committee issue that our colleagues on the other side raised, and how committees will not supposedly be able to vote on appropriations that, committee by committee or department by department for this specific fund of $7 billion of new programming. Are we to understand then that if they want to inquire how these monies are going to be spent, they'll have to invite whoever the departmental minister is to their committee, but have no voting in the appropriation? Is that how it's going to work? It's all us at OGO that will be voting for it? Just so that I understand this clearly. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Madame Mendez, for the question. Upon tabling of the main estimates, the relevant votes are referred to the appropriate committees. And in this case, the budget implementation vote is a central vote of Treasury Board, and so that vote has been referred to OGO. Okay. Now, that said, committees, when they're studying the estimates, can invite officials from any department and ask any questions they want about the estimates process. Each committee will conclude their deliberations by providing a report to the House, and if they don't report, they're deemed to have reported. And so if there are any comments or suggestions with respect to vote 40, those would come from this committee, from OGO. Now, again, that said, upon introduction of the supply bill, any member can introduce a motion that affects any part of the estimates. And so any member can introduce a motion to reduce or to negate an item that is identified in the budget implementation vote as has been clearly itemized in Annex A1. So as an example, using the President's reference to the opioid crisis, if that funding did not meet the will of the House, any member could introduce a motion to strip that item from the vote. And likewise, any other item that is, or initiative that is itemized.
But not to increase it.
But not to increase it.
Okay, just so we are understood. If there's an increase that is needed, it will have to come back as a whole new request.
It would be proposed by the executive and would be voted on by Parliament in a subsequent supplementary estimates. Yes.
Okay, that makes it a little clearer. So, but also going forward, would this mean that whatever new programming has been allocated to departments through this vote 40, next year would be then delegated to the department as part of their normal programming?
Right. Well, thank you. That's a very excellent question because, in fact, many of these initiatives, as we would see in the budget table, are profiled over a number of years. And so the initial allocation is to Treasury Board for disbursement out to departments upon approval.
To start the programming?
Exactly. Thereafter, they become part of the reference levels of those departments and would clearly be the responsibility of the appropriate minister for study at the appropriate committee. And they will be reflected in future years in main estimates of that department.
And part of their departmental reports?
Correct.
I'm guessing that will be also something that will be updated monthly or annually. Okay, that clarifies some things. Okay, so the other, there's another question that the Parliamentary Budgetary Office raised, and it's about the amounts actually on the related to the $7 billion, that as of April 16th, there was only 221 million of the total 7 billion that had been spread over 13 unique measures. And he's comparing it with last year's, where at the same level, 19 budget measures of 994 million had been allocated at the same, more or less at the same time. So his claim is that we will be presented with fewer vetted budgetary measures. What is your comment to that? How would you explain this?
Thank you again for the question. It is really a function of timing. As I think this committee would know, the budget was tabled on the 27th of February. There was an adjournment of Parliament thereafter for a 2-week break in March. They came back for 2 weeks, and then there was a 2-week break for Easter, returning on April 16th. And so the reality is, Parliament was not in session, there were not Treasury Board meetings, and so there were, quite frankly, very few opportunities for Treasury Board to conduct a budget 2018 business. To table the document on the 16th of April meant that we were completing it by the end of March. Last year, we tabled the supplementary estimates in late April, early May, and so there was a longer period after the budget for Treasury Board to conduct its business. So it is a function of timing, and every year there's a different parliamentary calendar, and this will impact our ability to bring the budget items to Treasury Board depending on
Forfeiting and
depending on that schedule. Yes.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Hortense. If you want to. Yeah.
I have a quick question for you. Have you moved away from? Did you ever do bottom line budgeting?
Boy, that's we'd be going back many years.
Okay, so you've always done line by line budgeting.
The process, our current process is such that Treasury Board will vet an initiative and provide approval, and then thereafter there can be a review or renewal if it is time-limited funding. We call those sunsetters.
Yes.
And in fact, many of the initiatives that Madame Menzies referred to were sunsetting initiatives that have been reviewed by Treasury Board, where we made recommendations to the Minister of Finance, and he accepted those recommendations and has included them in the budget. And so there is a review of initiatives, either because they are sunsetting or because we will periodically go in and evaluate and review programming.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Deltel, 7 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. Glad to have you back. I have 3 subjects I'd like to deal with in my time. The G7 summit, and I'd like to, before talking about the financing of that summit, I'd like to assure everyone here that we are in favor of this assembly. We're glad to have it here. We're happy that it's happening in Quebec as MPs from the area, but we're very concerned about the public expenditures that will be involved in that. We also agree with all expenses that will lead to any protection and improvement in the security of our citizenry. And if there are going to be protests, they can do it in good form. This, of course, will entail another set of expenses. We know that the basic is 341,600,000. Well, 340 million, let's say. That's a lot of money. And it might be, from year to year, every year budgets go up for G7, given the context, but there's no excessive expenses in there. Now, in the region of Quebec, I know people there, I know the area. We're very concerned, very afraid that these expenses will probably get out of hand. For those responsible for the Secretariat, Treasury Board Secretariat, it's an issue. But do you have in-house an individual who is actually tracking the expenditures or the costs, I should say, or is it going to be left to each department involved to track their own expenses in contribution to the G7? Thank you for your question, Mr. Dutel. The G7 summit is an initiative which will involve a number of various departments. If memory serves, it was itemized first in the supplementary budgets. At the same Canada Border Agency, the CRA, Citizenship and Immigration. Now, the origins of this initiative involved a coordination of various departments, several departments. together. They identified their individual needs. We, Treasury Board, studied these proposals of these various departments. Due diligence was applied, and we ensured that the amounts were appropriate. Of course, there will be a follow-up, and we will be tracking. Each department will be tracking, and we will be tracking the departments to see that these expenditures. Each department is responsible for their part of the initiative. But is there somebody at the Treasury Board who is the overseer, the guard dog, on watch for the entire process? With all of the stakes that are involved here, security. There's never too much security, mind you, but it could get off track very easily, fairly quickly. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it can happen quite easily. We understand that, but we need a watchdog. For each horizontal initiative, there is a department which will assume the lead. There's a lead department for any kind of multiple department, pan-department initiative. And there is, in fact, a chargé of a project that would be a file manager at Treasury Board. Well, we want it to work, and we don't want it to cost an arm and a leg. Second theme, digital services. Whenever we talk about computers or digitization, and we know it's going to increase in cost, etc. Okay, I've had my phone for 3 years, and now the infrastructure. It's the first time I've got one that lasted more than 2 years. But when we're talking digital, we know expenses seem to be fairly open-ended, and we will perhaps take on a subscription, a contract. We have to change that contract every couple of years. In the main estimates, we see TBSS is asking $233 million for vote 1. It was 220 last year, and it's Digital Services Canada. Are you going to ensure a follow-up, a tracking on those expenditures to make sure that, again, there's no overage on these expenses?
On that one, Mr. Chair, are we referring to the Canadian Digital Service? Yeah. So the Canadian Digital Services is actually funded for 3 years, and so we are tracking their budget. What the increase, this is one of the sunsetting programs Brian has talked about earlier. And in the second year, they've increased our main estimates by about $8.5 million. And we're tracking their results. And the third year, as they grow, because they are hiring experts who are focused on the new digital economy, and we will be spending $12 million next year. And at that point, then they have to go back to Parliament, Cabinet, and demonstrate the results that they've achieved, and a new decision will be made on an ongoing basis. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
And what I would like to know is that how sure are we that this process will work and will stay more than 2 years? Because as I said to you, in each and every time when it's time for us to spend for informatic issue in our private life, or for sure for the business and for the government, it's a ticket season.
Yeah.
You renew it each every 2 years, and then you have to spend another $1 million. So how sure are we that it will stay more than 2 years?
Well, the money sunsets, and the other thing that we have set up indicators to what we consider to be success for the Canadian Digital Service is that the applications they develop, the services they improve, the digitization that they accomplish are completed on time. We know what the cost per transaction, and hopefully the services costs go down, because that's the whole point of digitization, and that there's satisfaction from the clients that Canadians are serving.
Thank you very much. Mr. Blakey for 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. I'm curious to know, because in all the presentations and the documents that were prepared for the President of the Treasury Board's discussion of changes to the estimates from the beginning of the Parliament, didn't include discussion of having a central vote. I mean, a central vote seems to me to actually be about solving a different problem. It's not about information for parliamentarians. It's about accelerating the time between announced funding in a budget for a program and getting that program delivered, which is why I think it stands to reason that the idea of a central vote didn't come up in those documents. At what point did Treasury Board begin contemplating the idea of having one central vote for all the new budget initiatives?
Well, thank you, Mr. Blakey. As I think we all know, there have been numerous discussions on the challenges related to the estimates process, and the minister referred to commentary from a number of sources, including the Globe and Mail, which referred to the previous
Sure,
practice
and we're agreed on the need
discredited.
for change.
Right.
I'm just saying, at what point in the
Yeah.
process did Treasury Board contemplate a
So
central vote for new budget
in those
initiatives?
discussions, there's a number of different interests here, and timeliness is one of them. But I don't believe that that was ever the overriding objective. In fact, the president, if he was here, would insist on the need to bring clarity, more transparency, and alignment.
So at what point was the notion of a central vote developed as the mechanism to deliver new budget?
So following the
items?
changes to the standing order last June, we worked with the Department of Finance to identify what options were available to us. The changes to the standing order were limiting in the sense that it required us to table on or before the 16th of April. Finance was not aware of when the budget would happen, and that developed over the fall and early winter. So once it became apparent that we were looking at a late February budget, that's when we got...
So it's been about 10 months that idea was on the table, but hadn't been mentioned to opposition parties.
The discussions began with Finance immediately following this change of standing orders last June. It would have been discussions that intensified over the fall and early winter.
So about 10 months.
Well, the fall and early winter.
Sure.
Yeah.
Using a central vote to fund a whole bunch of initiatives across departments, I mean, what for you is the distinction between what's in the departmental estimates now? Like, why couldn't you just lump all of the voted authorities into one vote if you had a comprehensive enough table telling parliamentarians what the intended spending was? Like, what's the relevant difference now between items included in departmental estimates and what's included in the central vote for new budget initiatives?
Right. So again, the motivation here is to present the plan. So the estimates are the expenditure plan. It would be inconsistent and I think inappropriate if we were to present main estimates that did not reflect the budget, right? And so we have a budget that says we're going to spend $7 billion or hope to spend $7 billion this year.
But if you had one central vote for the entirety of what you need voted authorities for, that would also be presenting a plan.
Yeah, there's actually jurisdictions that do that. We don't think that that is best practice.
It's a bad model, but it's a model that's now been adopted for all of the new priority items that the government says is important.
Right.
So how could it be a bad model for what was announced last year and a good model for what was announced this year?
Right. Again, I would compare this to the $5.2 billion in our other central votes, where Parliament is providing Treasury Board with the authority to make allocations. But as you're voting on this, operating budget carry forward, capital budget carry forward, pay list, TB Vote 20, which is public service health and insurance, we can't tell you which departments, what initiatives, or what amounts. And with this budget implementation vote, we can, because of the close
No, but part of that is, I mean, you do have a clear purpose. So for instance, the central vote for pay list requirements, you know that it's going to be used to pay out because people go on mat leave or because they need to be paid out severance. You just don't know which department it's going to happen in.
Right.
That's very different than saying, hey, here's a long list of new priority government programs for the year, and we're going to lump all of that into one central vote. So I mean, both in terms of scale, because those votes also don't approach anywhere near, I mean, collectively they're about $5 billion, but they're not individually anywhere near over $7 billion. So I mean, there's a clear difference in terms of scale, but there's also a clear difference in terms of content.
It's aggregated in a single vote, that's for sure. But it is
Because prior to
disaggregated by
this,
department, by initiative, and by dollar.
prior to this, as a parliamentarian, if I were studying a government's new budget initiative, I would be asking questions either in the main estimates process, but more likely in the supplementary estimates process. And I'd be asking questions of a minister or of department officials that had the benefit of having gone through the Treasury Board costing process. So they would know how many staff they were going to hire. They would know what their capital requirements are. They would know where the offices would be located. Until a program has been through the Treasury Board approval process, details like that are not finalized. Is that the case?
Details like that are not finalized.
So if I were to ask questions of that about programs in Vote 40, it's possible that those answers are in principle not available to me because the departments have not yet developed those answers.
In principle, perhaps, but
That's a significant change from the way that we've done parliamentary approval for funding up to now. Because up to now, parliamentarians had access to those answers if they asked those questions, because those answers actually existed. Now we're talking about a process where that due diligence has not been done, so parliamentarians do not get the benefit of that rigorous costing and the answers to those questions, and are being asked to just vote approval notionally for the program and let the government figure out later what those important details are going to be. And there is no opportunity for this kind of scrutiny after the fact. So you're going to table the receipts, you're going to tell us maybe how the money was spent, but there's no opportunity for parliamentarians then to interrogate that.
Well, on that point, Mr. Blakey, I would argue that in fact there is, that committees are able to study the estimates process throughout the parliamentary cycle, that they can call officials at any time to ask any questions about programming, whether it's approved or in principle. We have itemized a list here of the budget. The president has referred to some examples, but we haven't had a question about what any
But
of
it's all post-approval. So that's Parliament studying the money after it's been spent. It's not Parliament trying to actually get those answers before. But isn't that kind of part of the fundamental role of Parliament, is to provide that kind of scrutiny?
Unanswered, because we have to move on to Monsieur Ayoub for 7 minutes, s'il vous plaît, Monsieur Ayoub.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to continue perhaps along the same lines as Mr. Delton, but might be different a little bit too. I'd like to talk about confidence and trust. There are some paradigms that change from time to time. Some of the background ones. This is the first time that the minister approaches us to share his wish to increase transparency and to provide more information. Now that seems clear. The intentions are there. The road ahead seems to be clear, to have more transparency. But it didn't seem to satisfy the members of the opposition. As we were speaking with the minister, he was sharing his expectations. He was trying his best to reassure us and the level of trust that he is trying to implement and set here on the issue of transparency. How do you, from your perspective, how confident are you that we will be able to provide to parliamentarians clear, precise information? Is this going to help us align our understanding, or do you think that things are going to be more ambiguous or unclear? I mean, a lot of very, very good statements, good issues, good declarations. But, there was perhaps this implied sense that we had our hand in the cookie jar, that things might be hidden or repurposed. When you're working every day on a daily basis, what's your level of confidence, of assuredness that we're headed in the right direction for not only the well-being of Canada, but for parliamentarians? Well, thank you very much, Mr. Ayoub, for your question. I think overall, the progress that's been made over the course of the last 2 or 3 years now has been significant. I think it's a clear indication of our commitment to transparency.
Of the steps that we have taken over the last number of years as part of his mandate to improve reporting and clarity of public finances. It began in the 2016-2017 estimates process, where we provided a high-level reconciliation to the budget in the supplementary estimates A, and we brought forward a number of the budget initiatives. We also, in that year, introduced for the first time in the final supplementary estimates of the year a table that indicated all of the money that had been approved by Treasury Board and had been approved by Parliament, but was not going to be spent. We call this lapsed funding. And so we were identifying for the benefit of parliamentarians the money that you had approved but would not be available for spending by departments. And again, the PBO cited that as a very important step forward in putting the legislature on a level footing with the executive. We have continued because of the changes in the standing order to bring much needed coherence to the way in which spending information is presented to Parliament. We had the budget this year in February that laid out the objectives of the government. And in that budget, for the first time, there was a detailed table that itemized by department, by initiative, and by amount exactly what was going to be spent to support the government's priorities. The expenditure plan that is included in these main estimates reflects that budget. And so we have brought a level of coherence between the two documents that simply never existed before. So I'm very comfortable that we have begun a process now that is shows a commitment to alignment with the budget and to transparency for Parliament with a great level of detail, and that there is a way forward to achieve even greater coordination, clarity, and transparency in terms of what
Est-ce
we're
que
doing.
c'est un mouvement qui est justement pour...
Is this a trend to improve Canadians' faith in our system, which of course seems to have arrived at a status that it's probably one of the best systems, perhaps just shy of what they have in Australia? Are we really on the cusp of a better sharing of information, change in culture perhaps? All change is difficult, however. What would be the next steps, in other words, what are the next obstacles maybe that we might be looking at to attain the so-called perfection? Well, thank you very much, Mr. Ayoub. I can assure you that change is very, very difficult, particularly in this environment, this context. The objective, of course, as you clearly stated, is to make the expenditure and main estimates process absolutely clear, transparent, and to align it with the budget. As to future steps, I think that the minister proposed an agenda for change in the autumn of 2017. He identified a certain timetable, and I think we're still respecting that timetable, and to reconcile budgeting and estimating processes. And then it's a matter of the parliamentary oversight of that process. And parliamentarians will vote credits, and whether they are operating or statutory. Now, other models have been proposed that would serve perhaps the same purpose of streamlining the process, making it more transparent. And it's a very interesting exercise for us to look at all these models. As to outcome and the setup of reports to Parliament, more detailed, if you will, the President of the Treasury Board did mention that we could use Infobase, a useful tool which gives you all the information in one place.
5-minute intervention, starting with Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, programs laid out in Table A211, some of them are really broadly written, and they don't really read like a specific expenditure that one could readily understand as a particular project. When you have headings that appear multiple times, like funds allocated to ensure security and prosperity in the digital age, or to ensure rules-based and responsible trade. I mean, these are more descriptions of method, in some cases, things like evidence-based policy. That's how you do something. It's not an actual project in of itself. Under these very broad headings which appear throughout that table, how many different projects or how many different specific initiatives are funded or could be funded? Are each of these supposed to represent just one thing, or are there multiple projects under one of these loose headings?
Well, thank you, Mr. Kelly. I do take the point that the description in A211 is a headline, and that underneath that there's a great deal of detail. And we will find that detail in, for example, the annex to the estimates that indicates the approvals already provided by Treasury Board. So there's a description of these measures using the same title, the same headline as you see there. The other point is, and you're quite right, that there are some of these headlines or some of these titles that are repeated in different departments, and that is by design in the budget, because the intention is to allocate certain sums of money to each department, but in some cases we're allocating money to these various departments for the same initiative, and we call that horizontal initiatives. The question from Mr. Dutel earlier is an example. Security for the G7 is an exercise that is going to involve the RCMP, the Canada Border Services Agency, public health, citizenship and immigration. And so where there are initiatives such as that that are going to a number of different departments, you will see the same title in that annex, and that is for maximum transparency. Another example is the opioid crisis, again, that the President cited. He was referring to $154 million to Health Canada, but in fact, there will also be money for this initiative in the budget table for CBSA, Public Health, and Stats Canada, because they will be working together as part of this initiative. And so the table is very comprehensive. It identifies, again, by department, by initiative, and by dollar, what they'll be provided with, and in some cases that includes some repetition.
So how will this be tracked? These expenditures in Vote 40 are not expenditures part of departmental plans that cannot be as easily lined up item by item through public accounts. How will we know, and how will we be able to, after the fact, determine that these funds were expended in accordance with the table, right. A211?
We've already begun that process, so it'll be a two-track process, Mr. Kelly. In tabled documents and tabled estimates documents, we will be including inserts with the detail of all the allocations and descriptions. We also have an online annex that is actually up and running now that will be updated monthly to show how disbursements from Vote 40 where they've gone, to which departments, for what measures, and in what amounts. And so as an example of that, in the table that exists right now, we've got $12.8 million for Canada Food Inspection Agency to support their work on inspection of domestic and imported foods and improving the risk intelligence and oversight of Canadian suppliers. There's a whole sentence there that I won't run through, but a fair bit of detail on each of those initiatives. And so it's that two-track process.
Okay, out of time?
Less than 30 seconds.
Well, I would just maybe, as quickly as possible, this Vote 40 exists, if I understood correctly, more or less as an expedient because there wasn't time for these $7 billion in expenditures to be properly vetted through Treasury Board. What's going to happen next year? How big will the similar vote be then?
Yeah.
That question again will probably have to be left unanswered, but Madame Ratenzi may offer you an opportunity to give an answer to that. Madame Ratanzi, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. And I have a question that maybe you can answer, and then you can answer Mr. Kelly's question. My concern is the difference between the opinions of the PBO and the Auditor General. The PBO asserted that the budget implementation vote does not allow sufficient oversight by Parliament. Yet you have put in measures that allows for this oversight. And the oversight has been the initiatives, you've got line-by-line items, they are controlled by legislation. So could you explain, I've always had this fight between economists and accountants. And the accountants know their debits and credits and know what to do with it. The economists do the fun things. Not the fun things, the boring things. But if you could explain how we can reconcile the two to clarify to parliamentarians that we still have the ability to keep the government accountable.
Well, thank you, Madam Ratanzi. I don't have the Auditor General's full remarks in front of me, but if I understood the gist of his comments yesterday, it was that he did not see anything particularly untoward in terms of the construct of the vote. The language in that vote wording, if we look at the language of all of the other votes of departments, is sufficiently legalese that he didn't see anything untoward there. He made very clear that if he had any concerns, he would audit this vote, but I believe he expressed some satisfaction that the combination of the vote wording and the detailed annex made very clear what the government's intentions were in this space. I believe that what the PBO's concern is that there wasn't an explicit reference in the vote wording to the annex. And the President has made very clear today that the final supply bill will make that explicit reference to the annex by department, initiative, and by dollar amount. And so I think that would address that.
So I have another question which deals with the line by line. So when a line by line item sunsets, or it's called lapsed funding, have you faced any challenges going back to finance to say, this is lapsed or it has sunsetted and these guys have not used it? Can we get the money back? Normally it goes to the Consolidated Revenue Fund. So could you explain where your challenges are?
If I had all day, Madame, it's a very important question, but it's an exceedingly complicated question because of the range of different programs and the different timetables that different programs are on. Your point about line by line is I think an important starting point. Parliament controls spending by aggregating a whole bunch of initiatives into a vote. And so we do not itemize by program or by project all of the different spending of departments. It is aggregated, and that is in part why the vote wording is so sufficient, obtuse to account for all of the different complexities of these programs. Now, underneath that, there is a great deal of control by Finance and by Treasury Board for each program and project. They're evaluated, they're reviewed. There are some that sunset because they were designed to sunset. There are some that they lapse money. They couldn't come to an agreement with a partner or a stakeholder or another jurisdiction. And then a decision is made by Finance. What do we want to do? Do we want to move that money into a new year and pursue the initiative? And we call that the money lapses, and when it is brought forward into a different year, it's reprofiled funding. And that is presented to Parliament if we decide to go forward with an initiative. That is included in the department's main estimates or in a subsequent supplementary estimates.
And that is good for accountability and transparency, because previous governments have put it back into the Consolidated Revenue Fund and reduced their deficits. Right. So this is something that will be preventable. But and if he has time, he can answer Mr. Kelly.
In 30 seconds, if you can provide an answer on that.
Sorry, to Madame Ratanzi?
Mr. Kelly.
Mr. Kelly's question. Vote 40 as an expedient. Sir, I would argue that the intention here is not expediency, it is clarity and alignment. The budget said we're going to spend $7 billion this year. Parliament endorsed the budget, and we're coming forward with an expenditure plan that includes the funding in the budget. There will be a Treasury Board process to allocate that money out, and there will be full reporting. Money will not be allocated until the program is good and ready and a benefit to Canadians. So,
thank you very much. Thank you very much. To all of you, to all of our witnesses, once again, thank you for being here. Thank you for your candor and your answers. There are undoubtedly going to be other questions that result as a or as a result of your presentation and the minister's presentation. I would assume, Mr. Pagan, that if committee members have further questions of you and your officials, you would welcome them and you would respond in kind in writing to our clerk. Similarly, if you have additional information that has not been discussed today that you think would be of benefit to our committee when studying the estimates process, I would encourage you again to send those suggestions to our clerk. Colleagues, we are suspended now for about 2 minutes. We'll come back for a very quick piece of committee business. We'll go on camera, and I'd ask the room to be cleared except for those individuals who are authorized to be here.